Welcome to Catholic Homeschool Radio, where we begin conversations to help parents enrich their lives and make practical decisions for the future.
Welcome back, friends. We are talking again with Pip Donahoe and Eileen Kocha, and we're talking about the classical school that they started, what classical education is. That's what we discussed on our previous programs. And we're going to continue today with talking about books that they use, just some of the fun books that have been that they found their own kids responded well to, and the books that they're using in their program now. So let's see, Pip, a long time ago, I don't know if you remember telling me this, but you said that you had a priest friend who said, the girls have it easy. They just seem to gravitate to good books. And I always thought that was very charming. I guess it might not be true now, but when you said it at the time, I thought back to my own childhood, and I used to go to a bookmobile, and I don't know if you know what a bookmobile is.
Oh, yeah.
It's a very abbreviated library on wheels, and the larger town used to send the bookmobile around to the smaller towns. So when I would go to that on a Saturday morning, there would only be a few shelves of books for my age. And I was really, really lucky, I think, because somebody had selected those books. And, out of probably a couple of hundred books, they had to reduce it to maybe 40 books to put on the shelves. And as a result, I was introduced to books I might not have seen in a larger library. For instance, G.K. Chesterton and the Father Brown mystery stories. And I loved mysteries. And so that was that. I just think that I was really fortunate to be able to find those books. Someone really set it up for me, and it was there. Do you think that's still true, that girls gravitate to the right books?
Yeah. When I see the general populace reading and the public libraries, I would say that isn't so.
Yeah.
I think it's more you have to just give them the good books and they will be educated that way. They're sort of more self-educators, I think, than boys.
Oh.
And so if you give girls a room full of good books, they'll read them and be more developed through that than, say, boys will. And there have been, in the last 20 years, more and more good list of books for parents that find themselves less educated.
Oh, uh-huh.
So that when they are worried about what their children are reading, there's these really good lists now that you can go to the library with confidence and tell your children any book on this list you can read.
Can we list some of those lists?
There's one by that I think is for sale, actually, by Teresa Fagan. It's called A Mother's List of Books.
Yes, uh-huh.
It started with John Sr.
Oh, yes.
And his students, that he had the thesis that you needed to read the 1,000 good books before you could read the 100 great books, being the whole development of the imagination and that literary sensibilities, which I think there's a lot to be said for that. And he had a list. And friends and I discovered that the list wasn't 1,000 books. It was way under 1,000 books.
Well, that's okay.
So
that's a relief.
So we decided we wanted to build it up to 1,000 books. And so that sort of started people, including Teresa Fagan, thinking about that and putting a list together. So
John Senior's book is in the back of it's either The Restoration of Christian Culture or The Death of Christian Culture. So that's an excellent list. So, and then you can get Teresa Fagan's list. Opus Dei has a list on their website, and it's very good. It's not as overwhelming. It has more to do with the list that they require of the kids in school. I did find it amusing that Jane Austen did not make, for the boys, Jane Austen did not make their A list or their B list, though the Brontes did. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, I think
can the boys read Jane Austen?
Yes, I'm going to make them read it because
they can and they will. And they'll like
what I said to them. If you end up, getting married, your wife may love Jane Austen, so you need to read this. At least for her. I mean, this isn't why. I just said this initially.
Well, that's a romantic reason to read it. That's sort of sweet.
And you know what? We're sitting reading it's a masculine thing. I mean, we're reading, the Aeneid, we're reading Iliad and the Odyssey, then we're moving all the way up through the moderns.
Livy and battles.
We need to read something feminine, something, and it just to give us something. I mean,
Yeah, of course her stories there's romance there, but it's the language which is so magnificent, and I'm always interested in men who love Jane Austen. It sort of turns my head because I know it's not because they're touched by this, the sentimental attachments, but because they just love the language and a sense of place that people have in those novels, a sense of duty, and a very civilized code of behavior.
Yes, I that's what I think I've learned most of my manners from Jane Austen. It's unfortunate. I think it's unfortunate.
That's great.
I mean, if you eat at a diner every day of your life, you're not going to learn good manners. If you live in a house where, I know very good people who they want their kids to be relaxed at home and feel comfortable, so they don't have manners. They don't practice them at the table. They don't practice them sitting, standing for people. And I think I've learned, honestly, except for grammar school, I did learn in grammar school some things, and I did. But really, that's all gone. That era of being courteous to people,
and we're not just talking about which fork to use at a table, but how you behave towards other people. And C.S. Lewis wrote an essay, a lengthy essay on Jane Austen. It was The Grammar of Courtesy, and I always think when grammar's in a title, and it's not talking about words, it's a little confusing. But like the grammar of assent, for Newman, but the grammar of courtesy and the beautiful way that people operate in a society that has very Christian codes. And it doesn't mean that this is the only way you can have a society, but this is definitely, all their codes were based on Christian principles. And that's why I think it's important for the guys to read as well as the girls. And I know I have some great brothers-in-law who just think of these Jane Austen films as chick flicks, and I just about die when they say that, because if they're very true to the original story, there's so much there, beyond just a nice happy ending. Okay, so then, so back to the lists. John Senior's, Teresa Fagan's, Opus Dei. Those will certainly get people
pretty
going.
Substantial. Yeah, I can't think of any of the published ones.
Yeah, that'll cover a lot of territory, and you won't find any Judy Blume on any of those.
No. Oh, I guess Michael O'Brien has one too.
He has a list
on his what he wrote a book, Landscape. What was that, Landscape of Dragons or Dragons?
Oh yeah.
He had a list too.
I didn't know that. That's would be good. But I'd like to look at that. So you're starting with kids in 6th grade, and do you have of course you have the books for them to read in school. Do you give them a list of books that they should read during the summer, or that they have, or just suggestions?
We haven't done. We did a summer reading for the high schoolers this year. One book, Mark Twain's Joan of Arc, but we haven't. Partly because the kids already have their own.
They're many of them go away, or they're doing Boy Scout, fulfilling some kind of requirement with the Boy Scouts, or doing film on whatever, or they're going down doing something, mission things, trips. So we didn't want to burden them to have to read. we will give them something to read every summer. The younger kids, we didn't. We only had one 6th grader last year. This year we actually have 4 middle schoolers. But they did read the Joan of Arc, and by and large, they loved it. Mark Twain.
6th grade on up?
No,
high school.
High school.
Yeah, I actually haven't read that.
I said this, if I had read this if I read this in my 20s, all my kids would have been some version of Joan.
Oh, well, I do have a Monica Joan. And I know the key thing is it's Mark Twain writing about her, and he was a total skeptic and had good reason, looking at that treatment of Joan of Arc, a good reason to despise many of the churchmen. So did you have a discussion with the students on it when they came back, and what kind of comments did they make? Do they love Joan?
Well, you know what? Some of us read it earlier, and this is the problem. You read it earlier in the summer or later in the summer, or you skimmed it, or you didn't. Maybe they didn't read it
as well.
As well. I think those people who read it, and everybody who did read it, everyone said they loved it, and they didn't realize how awesome she was.
Yeah. You know what? And that's partly because Mark Twain is so convinced of that. I think he's just able to say that this is one of the purest individuals who has ever walked the face of the earth. And he's able to say that partly because he is so critical of the rest of humanity.
Right.
And yet she can't be touched in many ways.
He could. Yeah, he saw that.
But he saw that.
I know he saw that.
Yeah.
Anyway. So, which is
He
nice to
wasn't
be
a
able to
fan
say
of
about
Jane Austen, though.
right about Mark Twain, that he
Yeah.
could see that.
Yeah.
He could recognize purity and truth when it was presented.
Mhm.
And lots of the times Pip and I have to say to each other, especially we have to say to each other, they're not in college.
That's right. That's
Yes.
right.
And we have these, and
back
believe it or
up
not,
sometimes.
they do reach our expectations many, many times in many ways that surprise us. But reading that novel over the summer, then having that one class discussion, probably wasn't the best way to handle that book, but I didn't want to assign them anything. I didn't want to burden them over the summer.
Yeah.
I wanted it to be as lazy summer as their mother would allow them to have.
I know what you mean. I know. Let them pick up the books that they want. I was concerned about my 8-year-old at one point because he had never picked up what they call chapter books. I never heard of chapter books until I was
Cool.
I was a mom, and I thought, oh my gosh, I got to get them chapter books. And he was 8 years old. He had never picked one up. He read. He would read for me. He would do his schoolwork, and then one day in the summer, he said, "Mom, I'd like to read The Hobbit." Oh, okay, I'll get it for you. I'm glad I didn't say, well, you haven't even read a chapter book.
Does that qualify as a chapter book?
So I got it for him, and he read it, and that was the first book he had ever read on his own. So that was just one of those moments when you're a homeschooling mom and you think, oh, good, I can cross that off the list. Yeah. So I didn't take my kids to the library very often. We might have gone on nasty days in February just for a little change of scenery, but I wouldn't say, okay, kids, go and get 10 books each, because I usually did not, we know that's problematic. And also not just because they can pick up books that we would disagree with or not like philosophically, but because I wanted them to have books that had wonderful illustrations. There are certain illustrators that are very popular, like Maurice Sendak. I don't like his illustrations. I don't like that little kids look at his rendition of other children, and I just didn't find that appealing. I wanted them to see lovely things, and that was my boys as well as my girls. So I did edit our own library, with that in mind, and that's why I didn't just turn them loose in the regular libraries. I think we have to be very defensive now about what what is placed before them. Because I do think beautiful images are an important part of their early education.
It just helps refine their whole music, art, whatever it is.
Yes.
If they don't see beautiful things first, then they aren't as inclined to it. And I agree, the public library, my eldest son was terrified of the public library once, and they had these big masks or something that children had made. They were hung all over, and he's screaming in the library. And it's like, whoa, well, I wasn't too eager to go to the library and let them pick out books anyway, so that provided a good excuse. They weren't always clamoring to go to the library.
Yeah.
So, and my husband is a bookie, and I am, so we have tons of books at home. So we did,
I see that,
and inherited tons of wonderful children's books. So we never had an issue of nothing for them to read.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we did go to the library. Libraries are so different now. You can be noisy in the library.
Yes,
it's really strange. So we would go to the library because there used to be, we used to have television. We don't anymore. But when they were very little, we used to watch Reading Rainbow. So there was always these, and they weren't bad books at all. So the library would often highlight those books on Reading Rainbow. So we would get those out, and I would make sure, I'd read through them really quick.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't as, and this word keeps going around, educated, right? Even though I had
militant.
Yeah, I guess I was uneducated. Even my daughters would say, "Oh, she can't pronounce that, Mom." At Wyoming Catholic College, I mispronounced a word as I was handing books to the students because I bought them for the students. And my daughter said to me, "Oh, she's uneducated." And she wasn't liberally educated. And I turned around and I said to her, "The only reason why you're educated is because I provided that for you." So,
they're so helpful.
They are very helpful.
Yes.
They're like me, very quick with the mouth and everything.
Keep you in your place.
But I think it's important that the parents, especially, just when they hear that word uneducated, that they understand what that means.
Mm-hmm.
That we don't mean you're ignorant or you're stupid or anything like that. It's just that you haven't been exposed to great authors that have influenced our civilization. And reading Harry Potter, even though some people might call that literature, isn't everything.
No.
And some people might think that, or whatever things that adults read today.
Yeah. I don't know what they read.
For my kids, I always banned things. So they couldn't even read American Girl books because I thought it was a marketing thing. They couldn't read those things. So
I was select with those, but it was totally problematic when Disney took over.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, it had a charming the initial idea was charming,
a nice
and
idea,
there were many nice accessories to it, but there's always a feminist influence with the books, and little girls becoming their own persons, and instead of books that where a child has to see that she lives in a community and has a relation to siblings, authorities, parents, and those are the kind of books that we do. That we would like to expose our children to, that there's a sense of that they have a sense of place, but of course we like the books of adventure, and some of them can be unrealistic, but that's okay too.
Yeah,
there were this is not great literature, but I guess it was back in the 50s, like the Happy Hollisters. There was a whole series of books for children, maybe around 6 to 8 years old, and there were about 4 children who were always solving mysteries, and they were my daughters loved those books, and it's not great literature, but it was interesting. They would always be in a different place, and
the grammar was correct.
Yes, it was, and they were kind and cheerful children, and they would be up against bad people. So, they left the house in the morning and somehow they found a murderer. Maybe they didn't get as bad as murderers, but
theft,
but it's just all
like just
what
the
happened in the
boxcar
day.
children were like
that.
that.
Yeah. It was, so there are all those series of books, which I do think are perfectly good, and they're wonderful to pick up at a tag sale. And, they're not going to be on your book list, but they're wholesome. So when you read you're going to read epics, I guess, in the high school.
Mhm.
You start with the Iliad. Is that can you get a previous Gilgamesh? I guess.
Gilgamesh is a little racy.
Oh,
I remember when I gave it to my son, and he was, "Mom, oops, I forgot about that part." So
yeah. So you read
the Iliad is
the
the
Iliad.
first.
Yeah.
Do you read the Odyssey too? And
Yes.
the Aeneid and then.
So this year we're
doing the Romans.
We're doing the Romans because
okay.
we do a cycle, a 2-year cycle of.
I see.
So this year it is the Romans.
For the sophomores
for the sophomore and freshmen.
With all our cultures steeped with action heroes, I do think that there is an appetite for the great leaders and the great men, but is the Iliad accessible to your students?
Well, yes, they did I think they ended up doing a paper about Achilles. I mean, finally, what's the book about? And is it Achilles' rage? Is that what it's finally about? For them to analyze that character, who people say is the hero, and then, really? To make them start to see what is a hero. I think that does appeal to them.
Yes.
And maybe not initially, takes them a while, but I think for those discussions, they start to think about it and start to compare it to the heroes they're presented with today.
Yeah.
It's a good...
And the fire of the tutor, the teacher, is very important. And when the students see that, even if they get half of the enthusiasm that that Pip might have, or that I might have, or any of the other teachers might have, that says a lot, and I think reading something like the Aeneid now, maybe for one or two of the kids, it might not be, they might not be there yet, especially the freshmen. But I think by the mid-year, I think there'll be a greater. Last year we read, ended the year with Plato's Republic, and we took a whole.
That is so tough.
It was
tough.
very tough.
It was very tough.
Did they get much? Probably not a lot. I mean, they got some. So it was worthwhile, but it was really good for them.
But to be introduced to the questions,
yes.
Right? To start thinking if that's all, just to get them to see there are bigger questions, and that they can get somewhere with them.
And I think they appreciated the ancient world in a way that.
Back then,
it's not. That's one of our banned terms. Back then,
back
then they were all they all ate each other, right? And then they see that, whoa, all the ethics, when they're reading Aristotle and reading Plato, they're going, wow, they're finally understanding that it's not that these people weren't picking fleas off them and eating them,
Yeah.
We start with the literature with the middle schoolers reading historical fiction as a way of teaching literature with the history, of combining them, which is a really great way to introduce them then to the epic, I think, to develop that, where they start to see perhaps not real characters, but heroes and characters that go through struggles. And it helps them place the history or hold on to the historical events, I think, that way. And so having those really, really good literature books for them at that age, I think, helps develop them.
What were some of the things that you read in those?
Well, we just finished the 7th years. Just finished Witch at Blackbird Pond, which is
okay.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So they're not the class, the big books, the classics,
but kind of an enjoyable read.
They're enjoyable. They're well written.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something wonderful about the characters. There's a great book, Carry On, Mr. Bowditch, which I had never heard of before, about a real character who's an amazing, amazing American. So for them to meet those people, or even real or fictional, really helps, I think, them to start looking at characters and character development and how they face struggles and how they go through that. So I think that's really, really important for the middle schoolers, so that then they can read the epics, the bigger works. I think John Senior's reading the 1,000 Good Books.
Yeah,
there is a lot to be said for that. So I think it's
to
really
form the
important.
moral imagination to begin with.
Exactly, really important what the middle schoolers read before.
Yeah, my daughter is at Wyoming Catholic now, and she does have an essay due, and she has to decide who is the more heroic, Achilles or Hector? Do you have an opinion on that?
Hector.
Well, but that's Hector by a Christian point of view. And then, so
But even
my
from a
curiosity
pagan,
is, it's about Achilles, and I mean,
it's
I find
about
it,
Achilles. But finally, does Achilles act heroically? Do you think?
I don't like the way he acts at all from the very beginning, and when he finally throws in with his fellow.
But you think that's
Greeks,
a pagan?
I think that
he's a hero.
I think
pagan.
I'm wondering. I don't know enough. I think that from the point of view of.
But it seems like he doesn't act it's not even manly. Even
no, I know
if
he's
not
horrible
Christian,
too.
it's just it's not manly. It seems some of his
the way he deals with Hector's body at the end is despicable. But that was not considered immoral
back then.
But I do wonder if Homer thought this is, I maybe he thought this is, despicable, and he might have thought that,
right.
and maybe was introducing some higher ideas into a very masculine culture. That maybe there is, to be powerful over another man's body might not be a sign of virtue.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really one of the beauties of literature, I think, is just the fact that you can even ask those kinds of questions about Homer without really knowing what Homer's reasons were,
right.
what his motivation is in singing, in singing the
right.
Right. So, that's what's really wonderful is that these questions, because I think when I read it at St. John's, all I thought the whole time while, because the men loved it. The men in the class were sitting there going back like it was, and all I just thought was like, wow, I'm not tapping into something here. That's all I thought.
I do think that's really important to have, to free men up once again, to talk about so-called manly virtue, whether it's of a pagan nature or of Christian nature, and they're going to just respond to it differently, and that's sort of, freeing, I think, to them, and it's kind of necessary for all of us to see, and for the young kids to see too, that hey, there's some things that men are going to like better than women.
Yeah, we're doing modern literature for the older kids this year. So I have the juniors who were sophomores last year who read the Iliad and the Odyssey. So it's interesting to see we just finished reading Arundel, which is not a great
classic
book, but by Kenneth Roberts, but just to show the pre-revolutionary American Revolution time up in Maine and Quebec, and to see there were men just like.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they
that's
just
scary.
wanted
Was that
for the
good?
glory. No, but they saw there was just something
about
they're
the same.
There was just something about, and these guys weren't even soldiers. They were just regular rabble. They were just the.
I think that's really important for all of us, in our society now, to see that men have a track record of wanting glory, and is that because they're just, the poor creatures are just so benighted they don't know what the higher things are, or is this something real in a man's nature and women have to deal with it?
Yes.
And maybe it's something, it's there, it's God-given, and it has to be put into the service of truth and civilization.
Not squished, but
yeah.
Right.
And of course, I fear so much with our current politics that our society has lost sense of what woman's nature is, what man's nature is, and we'll have a draft for women.
It went through the House or Senate. It went through one of them already.
Yeah, it was stayed, but that's because of people like Senator Cruz. God bless him. But then that brings us back to the study of nature.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know some people think, well, if it's so hard to figure out, then it can't be very natural. But
It isn't hard to figure out. They just deny it.
Yeah,
they want to deny
true.
it. It's not hard.
But it has to be laid out. You know, you have to have a common conversation about it, and you have to have a common experience, which is why I like these books. You know, the great books, the good books, the books that are serviceable for education. You have a common base so that kids who are studying this at their charters at your school here can discuss it with the kids from the charter school in Arizona. They have a lot in common. They have a lot of reference points, and to me, that's how you have a culture, when you have common reference points, which in one way makes me glad we don't have tons of great literature now, because if we had tons, of new great literature, we would be so dispersed. But instead, we have kind of a limited amount of literature, which gives us all a common experience of thinking men for the past 2,000 years. So we have to end this now, and I am so pleased that both of you joined me. Thank you so much. I know this was a lot of time, but it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot too from you.
Thank you.
And Pip and Eileen are with Sedes Sapientiae School. And if you would like to check them out, and especially if you're in the New Jersey area, you can go to sedessapientiaeschool.org. Thanks so much, ladies.
Thank you.
Thanks.